Geoffrey Smart's Morning Practice, Baia, 1969. Well, that's what we know about this painting. It was painted by Geoffrey Smart. It's in a place called Baia, which happens to be in Italy, and it's about a morning practice. And of course, in 1969, these are the sort of the outfits gentlemen would wear at the beach. We're going to identify, analyse and attempt to interpret this painting by Geoffrey Smart, first looking at the use of the elements of design and some of the principles of composition, and then looking at the use of the symbolic imagery to help us understand the narrative. The elements of design are the elements an artist uses to make an artwork. They are like the ingredients in a cake. The principles of composition are the rules artists use to put artworks together. They make an artwork pleasing to the eye. They are like the recipe which tells us how to mix the ingredients. Ingredients and recipe. Let's have a closer look at this painting. Where do we look and why? Well, the gentleman in the middle balancing the cube, the bright yellow cube, it's pretty obvious. We'd call that a focal point. Our eyes are being dragged towards it, even if not initially. It doesn't matter where we start in the composition, our view will always be pulled towards this section here. Let's find out why. The use of space, a principle of composition, helps us understand what's going on in the scene. Dividing into quadrants, we can understand that there's a lot of stuff happening in these sections. Certainly in the narrative. In the narrative, perhaps there's nothing happening in these. But in the composition, there's always something going on, something to help us understand the narrative. The principles of line, shape and form. We have a frame within a frame, and a frame within a frame within a frame. Perhaps Geoffrey Smart helping us concentrate our view on what's happening in the middle of the scene, towards the foreground. These triangles are pulling our attention inwards. If our eyes are at the left of the composition, they're being dragged down to the figure in the bottom. And it's the same here on the steps, even repeated with the shadows. And of course there's a very obvious arrow pointing at the box itself. Here it is, in the form of a shadow of the box. Geoffrey Smart is telling us to look over here. And of course there's a lot of lines. The lines of the gentleman's legs are pointing up to the box. On the tops of the bricks, even the bottom, and of course the shadow of the bricks. In fact, the lines of the sea, the railings, even the clouds themselves draw our attention always to what's happening in the middle of the piece. Lines are pulling our attention towards the narrative. The story has to be about the man in the cube. The use of tone. If we desaturate, take all the colour away, we're left with some strong tonal contrasts of light and dark. Of course, in the middle, but these areas too. And perhaps if our eyes are being directed to these tonal areas, they're then dragged towards the centre by the previous lines and shapes. Colour. A reminder, the nature of colour and colour harmonies. Analogous colours are neighbours and blend. Complementary colours are opposite and enhance each other because they clash. Tint is adding white, shade is adding black. The colour wheel here is made up of primary, secondary and tertiary colours. And it's the use of colour that sets Geoffrey Smart's artworks apart from so many others. It's clever, although quite subtle. There are some very strong colours in here. The yellow of the box is very bright. The blue of the boards on the back and the red, even though these are tints, a tint of blue and a tint of red, sometimes we might call pink. They are, of course, the primary colours. To enhance the yellow, Geoffrey Smart does something very subtle. We see yellow's complementary pair, purple. And of course it's a tint of purple. And of course purple is made from blue and red, the parent colours. Primary red and primary blue would make secondary purple, and purple against yellow clash. They enhance each other. Geoffrey Smart's Morning Practice, Baia, 1969. What's the narrative? Why is it so? The narrative has to be about this gentleman, this perhaps middle-aged, maybe older, balding, slightly grey, small paunch. This gentleman is perhaps retired. It's got to be about him. He's the only person here. And this cube has to be symbolic. What he's doing must be symbolic. In fact, there's a lot of symbolism happening in this narrative. Let's try and have a look at some of those things. Well, it's the morning. He's practicing for something, for swimming. Perhaps he is retired. Perhaps he's taking some time out of his day. A beautiful sunny day, we would think, with the shadows being cast. But the dark, ominous, foreboding clouds are rolling in. Perhaps these clouds, therefore, are surreal. They look real, but perhaps they can't be. If it was a stormy day, would we see the reflection of the clouds in the sea? We have a blue, confident blue sea here, with a hint of green against the red. Maybe the clouds and the oncoming storm are symbolic. Something bad is going to happen to the man. But he's bathed in sunlight. And he's looking after himself. When we look at sunlight, and we can look how we've been directed to it, this cube in the middle at its oblique angle, perhaps mirrored by the angles of the fence and the brickwork, is perhaps more symbolic of the sun. And as it's the morning, the sun is rising. And if it's rising, it means his legs are pushing up. It's ascending. The storm clouds, the grey, Geoffrey Smart very cleverly brings from the background and paints into the foreground, again, a surreal edge missing. The sky encroaches on the man, but the man pushes through. It is the sun. It is rising against a blue sky, and perhaps the red earth is symbolic of a new day. It doesn't matter what's coming around the corner. The man is looking after himself, practicing. Perhaps that's the narrative that Geoffrey Smart was suggesting.